Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar entitled Healthy and Lasting Weight Loss. We have an educational and entertaining session in store for you. Our presenter today is Brian Sanderoff. Brian is a pharmacist that used to own and operate 2 pharmacies in downtown Baltimore. After practicing traditional pharmacy for 10 years, he came to the realization that dispensing maintenance medicines for chronic diseases wasn't actually helping. The diseases were not really going away, as evidenced by the fact that people had to continue to take their medicines. At this point, Brian began a journey of exploration that led him to further explore health and disease in a completely different way. The philosophy that he has developed comes from a unique blend of scientific data, practical experience involving thousands of patients in his private practice, coupled with an ability to understand how nature works and how better to live in sync with nature. Brian is the guiding force behind the Well-Being Healing Center and Holistic Pharmacy. At the center, they specialize in helping people better understand the true cause of disease and discomfort and empowers them to create positive change and ultimately take control of their own good health. Just a few housekeeping issues. You will be muted during the webinar, but you have the ability to ask questions during the presentation. Just type your question in the question box, and we will be able to see it. We will try to get to as many questions as possible within the time frame of the webinar. You are also always welcome to get in touch with Brian through the Wellbeing GPS website for more questions. Just go to www.wellbeinggps.com and click on the Contact Us button. In addition, our live webinars are recorded and will be available along with the PowerPoint presentation for you to share or to listen to at your convenience. Again, go to www.wellbeinggps.com, your navigation tool to being well. And in just a moment, I'll turn the screen over to Brian Sanderoff. I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Hi, everybody. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Maybe Cheryl, give me a little high sign there and let me know that you can hear me okay. I really appreciate all the attendance today. It looks like it is a great crowd, and I really look forward to sharing some information with you. And again, encourage you to get in touch with me anytime, not on the webinar if you have some questions or if we need to talk over something specifically about you. Before we get started, just wanted to ask a quick question, sort of a little poll out there that maybe you guys can answer for me online, little audience participation here. So here's the question. Has anyone out there tried a diet, lost weight, but then ended up gaining that weight back? And so if you can, just sort of type into the question thing, yes or no. Just curious to hear about that out there. Let's see. Cheryl, you're saying you can't see my screen. I have it up. Now you can. Okay, good. All right, so we're good to go. So that's the title screen saying healthy and lasting. And again, just a quick yes or no from you guys out there about having lost weight. So good to get started. And first thing I want to tell you is, as you can see there on your screen, is that diets don't work. That's the bottom line. And what I mean by that is, if you ever do go on a diet, inherently, what that also means is that at some point you're going to go off of that diet. And that's not what we really want, because that's not a long-lasting, lifelong change. What we really want to do is help you learn to change your relationship to food, to have your understanding of how this whole thing works, how the foods that you're eating and your other lifestyle issues are affecting whether you're losing weight or maintaining proper weight or not. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. What I'm talking about is not a diet. Here, I got some answers to the poll here. Seven people said yes, and 2 people said no to that answer. So to the question. The question was, have you ever tried a diet, lost weight, and then gained the weight back? And so my experience with a lot of people is that that's what happens, that you'll go on Weight Watchers, or you'll do Atkins, or you'll do this, or you'll do that. And while you're doing it, it's great. You lose weight. And then when you stop doing it, you gain weight back. Oftentimes, I'll also tell you that when people go through that up and down, that little yo-yo, they actually have increased their percent body fat in that process. And that's the next thing I want to talk about, is what's the difference between weight loss and fat loss, and what's really important for you. Bottom line is, in relationship to your health, your longevity, avoiding chronic disease as you get older. It's not really about how much you weigh, it's about how much fat you have. I'll say that again. I don't really care how much you weigh. What I care about is your body composition, how much fat you actually have in your body, because that is the determining factor in avoiding many of the things that we wanted to avoid as we get older. So body composition really is the important thing here. And what I'm going to talk to you about today and the rules I'm going to give you to follow are ones that are designed to help you lose fat. Now, of course, you'll lose weight when you lose fat, but you really have to lose fat. That's really the key here. Loss of muscle mass. It is the #1 marker of aging, actually. And there's a clinical term for it, or there's a medical term for it. It's called sarcopenia. And as it turns out, as you get older, the main source of amino acids that your body uses to build and repair, and I'm talking about things like immune function, I'm talking about things like your brain chemistry, I'm talking about things like your enzymatic activity, which are basically the controllers of everything that goes on in your body biochemically. Your body uses your own muscle mass as the main source for those amino acids to rebuild and repair. And when you don't have that muscle mass as you get older, that's when disease happens. So if you look at this little screen here, this little graph, you'll see that on the bottom, this is age. And so, as you're getting older, you move to the right. And on the left is a measure of health. This black line here shows you how we start to decline as we lose our muscle mass. And so you'll see that, mid-30s, 40s, as you lose your muscle mass, that's when health starts to decline. Whereas if you maintain your muscle mass, this blue line up here, then you maintain health to a much later point in life, and then things start to decline. And this decline, this area in here, are the things that we can control and the things that we're talking about today. So one of the key issues in understanding what's going on in your body and the underpinnings of all the chronic disease is really a simple question. How does your body handle sugar? Now, there's a term, again, a medical term for when we're not handling sugar efficiently. It can be called insulin resistance. Another name for that is metabolic syndrome or syndrome X. Sometimes it's even known as prediabetes. And all of those terms, those 4 terms, mean the same thing. And basically, it's a measure of whether your body is efficiently handling sugar well. If it's efficiently handling sugar, then chronic disease and, unfortunately, your waistline and the amount of fat that you carry in your body is at one level. And if it's not efficiently handling sugar, that is the underpinning of all sorts of things, including, again, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, mood issues, immune function. And when I say immune function, that means many cancers are related to your body not handling sugar very efficiently. And so, very important to evaluate this. So, what are some of the general features of metabolic syndrome or syndrome X? This is how you can sort of determine for yourself whether your body is handling sugar very efficiently. #1 is abdominal obesity. And we have a measure of this, and there's a way that we look at it in people, and that has to do with the ratio of the circumference of your waist compared to the circumference of your hips. And so you could do a measurement, you could do it right now if you want, or you could just simply look down, or many of us don't even have to look down. We know the answer to this. And the ratio that we're looking at may be a little bit different for men versus women. And that's because our bodies are constructed differently. So for men, we want that ratio to be 1 or less. And what that means is we want the circumference of our waist to be equal to the circumference of our hips, or we want the circumference of our waist to be a little bit less. And so, if we have a 34-inch waist and we have 32-inch hips, that ratio is more than 1, and that's an indication that metabolic syndrome, or another way of saying it, your body's not handling sugar very efficiently. For women, we want that ratio to be 0.8 or less. And what that means is that women are supposed to have a little bit wider hips. That's a biological thing. Women are supposed to be a little bit more pear-shaped than men. And for both men and women, if we're more apple-shaped, that's where we run risk of all of these chronic diseases. So abdominal obesity, number one. Number two, altered blood lipids. And so what that means is increased triglycerides, low HDL, which is supposedly the good cholesterol, elevated LDL, which is the bad cholesterol. And I also put small particles in there because that's another issue when it comes to cholesterol. And it's, again, another important issue to understand. And we'll talk about it in much more detail in an upcoming webinar where we're going to talk about cholesterol more specifically. But the bottom line is, when it comes to cholesterol, we want to evaluate the particle size. And small, dense molecules are the ones that have a tendency to infiltrate the linings of the blood vessels, especially in the heart, that end up causing the clogging of the arteries or starting that process. And fat, fluffy molecules do not. And small particles, small, dense cholesterol molecules are a hallmark of metabolic syndrome, or syndrome X, again. Elevated blood pressure. Insulin resistance, which means basically that when you have sugar in your bloodstream, insulin comes around and says to cells, hey, here's some sugar, you're going to use this for energy or store it for energy. And when insulin knocks on the door, the cell ignores the knock. In essence, that's insulin resistance, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. A tendency towards inappropriate blood clotting, and again, what I'm talking about is what ultimately ends up in clogging, clogging of the arteries, making those blockages, and increased inflammation. There are all sorts of ways that we measure inflammation. That, again, will be the topic of an upcoming webinar. I think that one's in April. And inflammation and how your body handles sugar are the two underpinnings of chronic disease. Far and away, you address those two things with diet, exercise, lifestyle, and supplements, you're not going to suffer from the same sort of problems that your parents did. It really is that simple. So that's a big mouthful there. The big question is then, how should we eat? And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to give you some simple rules. We're going to talk about following these rules. But first, let's understand this. How should we eat? The answer to this comes from really understanding our past. And I like to take a little time to explain this so that you understand it. And sorry if it seems like I'm going over this in too much detail, but I think it's a really important concept to understand. And that is that the way we eat, the way we used to eat when in the good old days, and when I say the good old days, I'm talking about when we were hunter-gatherers. The difference between that and the way we eat today is the reason that we have such a problem, not just with our waistlines, but with chronic disease as well. Throughout history, and when I say history, I'm talking about the millions of years of evolution, the millions of years of us, being here. Our bodies have adjusted to our environment and what we're exposed to in a very, very specific way. Here's an example of that. Because for a long, long period of time, we had exposure to fruits and vegetables that gave us vitamin C. Eventually, our bodies gave up the need to make vitamin C internally. It used to be that our bodies would make vitamin C. And again, through hundreds of thousands, millions of years of having exposure to foods that gave us vitamin C, our bodies adapted to that by not making it ourselves, not needing to make it because we're always getting it from the outside world. But it takes literally millions of years for that sort of process to happen. The time that we've been eating grains and cereals and the way that we eat today, in essence, what I'm saying is the time that we've become less hunter-gatherers and more living in one area, doing agriculture, growing crops and herding animals. That is a relatively short period of time compared to the whole of our history. It's just a drop in the bucket, really. And we haven't been doing it long enough for our bodies to have adjusted to that vast difference in food. And so from that big historic perspective, the way we eat today has been a huge change in a very short period of time. And genetically, we are not geared to handle that or to have that be healthy, or we haven't adapted to that. And that really is the key understanding here, because when we were hunter-gatherers, we ate a certain way, and that is the way our body is designed to handle food. That's not what we do today. And that is why our bodies respond the way they do to those foods. And in essence, saying that we do not handle our sugars very well. I mean, that really is the bottom line. And again, don't forget, if you have questions about this, type them in and they'll get to me. When I did this webinar 2 days ago, one of the questions was, well, what about low-fat foods? And you will notice that I'm not talking about fats very much at all. Our waistlines being what they are and chronic disease being what it is today for us has very little to do with the fats in our food. It has everything to do with the sugars that are in our food. And again, we'll digest that, so to speak, a little bit more as we go along. So what are the rules for proper eating? Rule number one, and I'm going to give you 3 rules. They can be really simple, and for many people they can be complicated because it might be a vast difference from what we're used to doing. But if you follow these 3 rules, I can guarantee you that some changes will happen. The obvious changes will be what happens with the clothes that you wear, how they fit, and what goes on when you jump on the scale. The less obvious changes may be that you're losing fat instead of muscle, but you are losing fat. And then you'll see other changes. Blood pressure, cholesterol, triglycerides, blood sugar, headaches, mood, immune function, hormonal function, all those things will normalize. Rule number 1 is you have to eat low glycemic index foods. So what is the glycemic index of a food? In essence, the glycemic index is a measure of how quickly the sugar that's in that food hits your bloodstream. It's not necessarily saying that it's a low sugar food, but it's saying that the sugar doesn't hit your bloodstream so quickly, or it does hit your bloodstream so quickly. So obviously cakes and candies and donuts and pastries, those are very high glycemic index foods, meaning that you eat it and immediately your blood sugar goes up. A moderate glycemic index food will be something that has sugar in it, like, say, a strawberry. But if you're eating that whole strawberry, the blood sugar goes up in a more measured response. And the reason is because of fibers and enzymes that are in that food. And that allows for your body to have a more measured response to it. Low glycemic index foods are ones that really don't raise your blood sugar very much at all, or don't have any sugar in them. So any sort of protein, chicken, fish, beef, no glycemic index whatsoever, because it really doesn't have any effect on your blood sugar at all. The glycemic load is sort of an extension of this idea of the glycemic index, and what that is it's also taking into account the density of that food. So if we were to look at something like watermelon, we would say that it has a fairly high glycemic index because it has a lot of sugar in it, and that sugar can hit your bloodstream pretty quickly. But the glycemic load of it is actually sort of moderate, just because it's not a very dense food. So if you're eating some pieces of watermelon, the sugar that's in there will hit your bloodstream fairly quickly, but it's not a huge amount of sugar. You would have to eat like a whole watermelon to get too much sugar from that. And that's because the load is different. Whereas if you had something that's very dense, like a piece of bread, that has a higher glycemic index and a higher glycemic load because of how many calories you get from, a small piece of it versus what you would get from, like I said, like a watermelon. So I want to explain to you the vicious cookie cycle. And this really explains the crux of it right here and why you have to eat low glycemic index foods. So here's the deal. You eat a cookie or some other sort of high glycemic index food, some high GI food, and what that does is it causes a quick spike in your blood sugar. When that happens, your body responds by saying, wait a second, there's a lot of sugar here. I need insulin to help find where to put the sugar. And because the bloodstream, because the blood sugar went up so quickly, the body over-responds. It makes too much insulin because it says, wow, that was an onslaught. I'm not designed to handle that. It's going to keep happening. I'm going to overproduce insulin. So your pancreas overproduces insulin, and then what happens is your blood sugar actually goes low. And the reason is because insulin was overproduced and then takes all that sugar and it puts it somewhere. Now, in your body can use sugar for energy, and it can also use protein. It can break protein down for energy as well. It can break down fats. But in your brain, the only thing that can be used for energy is sugar. So when your blood sugar goes low, your body says, wait a second, I need a certain amount of sugar for normal brain function. And because of that, I'm now going to have to get more sugar in my diet. And so you actually have increased hunger. And then you eat something else, which also oftentimes is another high glycemic index food, and then that whole cycle happens. Again, that's called the vicious cookie cycle. And so metabolically, you don't even recognize this fact, but metabolically, when you eat a high glycemic index food, you are driven to eat 200 more calories at your next meal without even realizing it. You're just hungrier, and that's because of this effect. Another thing that I want to show you or talk to you about is the sumo wrestler's diet. And so, I don't know if you know this or not, but sumo wrestlers, to be able to compete, and that's like a big, it's a big thing in Japan. To be able to compete, you have to be a certain weight. You cannot go below a certain weight to be able to even compete. And so they work really hard to make themselves that big. And here's the sumo wrestler's diet. They starve themselves all day long, and then in the evening they have huge bowls of pasta, and they immediately go right to bed. So if you want to look like a sumo wrestler, then that's the kind of diet you should have. And I would ask you, how close is that to what we really do in our diets? We don't eat as often as we should during the day, and then in the evening we have these high carbohydrate meals, and then we go to bed, and so that's why we pack it on like that. So rule number 1, eat low glycemic index foods. Here, I just wanted to also share with you that there are some surprises with the glycemic index of certain foods. So obviously, again, cakes and candies and donuts and all that kind of stuff, chocolate, all those things are high glycemic index foods. Well, I'm also here to tell you that bread, pasta, cereal, grains for the most part are high glycemic index foods. And usually someone now asks, well, what about like 12-grain whole wheat bread? For many of us and the way that our bodies work, having that piece of 12-grain whole wheat bread is just like having a Snickers bar. So if you wake up in the morning and your breakfast is a piece of that toast, some butter on it, it's not very different than having a Snickers bar. If that's the case, I say have the Snickers bar because it's a lot more fun than that piece of bread. Also, and again, this is sort of the surprising things, potato chips, very high glycemic index. And to me, when I first understood that and learned that, that was kind of surprising because we think about potato chips as being fat and salt, but not being sugar. And yet it has a very, and it's part of why they're so addicting, why you can't just eat one. Because it raises that blood sugar, and that feels good in the short term. So even chips, not so good for you. The simple rule of thumb that you could ask yourself, the simple question that you could ask yourself that you can use as a rule of thumb for deciding if you're eating something that's high or low glycemic index is how much is it processed? You have to understand that the more processing that goes into a food, the more it's going to be like a simple sugar. So the question to ask is, does this food exist this way in nature? If the answer is yes, then chances are it's going to be more moderate or low glycemic index. And if the answer is no, then not. And so another way of saying that is that you don't see bagels growing on a bush. You don't see pretzels growing on a tree anywhere. Those things are high glycemic index and should be avoided. And it doesn't have to be a lifetime of this. But I do recommend that you experience getting off of those foods for a little bit and see what happens to your body. And sometimes people say, well, you're talking about an Atkins diet. I'm not at all. I'm not talking about a low carbohydrate diet. What I am talking about is a controlled carbohydrate diet. You should have carbs, and you need carbs in your diet, but they should come from fruits and vegetables, legumes, nuts and seeds, that kind of thing, as opposed to breads and pastas and cereals. So rule number 1, low glycemic index foods. Rule number 2 is you have to eat something within 45 minutes of waking up. And again, just key to making your body work properly. So when you wake up and you go around and you haven't eaten anything, you start your day and you start moving around and you haven't eaten anything, the message you're sending your body is there's no food available. That's called starvation. And even if it seems like it's a short period of time, your body remembers metabolically, again, when we were cavemen, when we were hunter-gatherers and there was no food available. And there's two things that the body will do. It will decrease metabolism and increase fat storage. So decrease metabolism, that goes against what we want. What we want our bodies to do is burn more calories. We want it to burn calories efficiently, and we want it to be willing to burn excess calories and or calories that are coming in the diet. And the body also wants to increase fat storage because it's saying, well, I remember when there was starvation, so I better hold on to as much stored energy as I can. And again, we have a different word for stored energy, and that is also fat. So you wake up, you start moving around, you get your day started, and you don't eat anything. The message you sent your body is there's no food available. And the body's response is I'm going to slow metabolism, and I'm going to hold on to as much stored fat as I can. And when you lose weight from doing this, the weight that you lose is actually muscle instead of fat. And that goes against what we want. Again, go back to the beginning of this talk. Loss of muscle mass as we age is the key to chronic disease. It is the #1 marker of aging. Got a question here. I see that Brian wants to know, what about brown rice? So if you are going to eat grains, you have to eat them in the most natural form that you probably can. So if you're having something like brown rice, or a barley, or like a steel-cut oatmeal, that kind of thing, that is the most acceptable of those. Obviously, if you look at the processing and you say, how do we compare brown rice to white rice is much more processed, much more like a simple sugar, and will have a higher glycemic effect, or a higher glycemic index. Brown rice will have a lesser so, and yet is still fairly high glycemic. And so depending on the degree of which you have metabolic syndrome or syndrome X, or that your body isn't handling sugar very efficiently, for many of my patients as I'm working with them, for a period of time, I'll try to shock their system into using sugar more efficiently by completely avoiding any sort of grain like that. And then they can add it back in small amounts as they move forward. And someone else, it may be just sort of cutting down or saying, all right, well, I'll have some brown rice instead of having a pasta. Hopefully that answers the question for you, Brian. So again, the effects of starvation, decreasing metabolism and increasing fat storage. So what's the opposite of that? You wake up and within a half an hour, 45 minutes, you eat something. The message you sent your body is there's plenty of food out there. And the body's response is, wait a second, I can burn calories and I don't need as much stored energy. Actually, the body's response is, I need more muscle because I need help in going out there and chasing down those deer that I'm going to eat. And that's really what we want. We want more muscle and less fat. So that's why you have to eat something within 45 minutes of when you wake up. Okay, so rules for eating. Number 1, low glycemic index foods. Number 2, eat something within 45 minutes of waking up. And then rule number 3, you have to eat something every 2.5 to 3 hours during the day. And again, it's for the same reason. If you eat breakfast, you wake up, you eat something within 45 minutes, and then you go 5 hours before you eat lunch, or worse. I mean, many of us, truth is that we skip lunch because we're busy at work or whatever. We've confused our body. Again, we said, wait, there's food, and then we say, no, there's no food. The body will always remember that no food. Then you eat something, the body says, okay, thanks for the food, but I remember when there was no food available, so I'm still going to keep my metabolism down, and what you just gave me, I'm going to store as energy for tomorrow. And again, another word for that is fat. So we definitely want to make sure we eat something every 2.5 to 3 hours. Now, they don't have to be huge somethings. They can be snacks. They can be whole meals. They could be a low glycemic index protein. shake or bar, and there's a whole bunch of those, on the market. There's ones that I use a lot in my practice with my patients. So I just wanted to lay out for you what, in my opinion, for most of us would be the perfect day of eating. So let's say you wake up at 6:30, 7 o'clock, 2-egg omelet. That's whole eggs, none of this egg white stuff. Eat the whole eggs with some veggies. That would be the ultimate breakfast. Around 9:30, got to have a snack. So that could be a handful of nuts. I'll also tell you, people also say, well, what about like dried fruit, like raisins and apricots and that kind of thing? Fruits that are dried, the reason we like them so much and the reason they're so sweet is because you're concentrating the sugar. So the truth is, again, back to what nature provides for us, it'd be better for you to eat grapes than raisins. If you want to have raisins, if you combine them with some almonds, say, you sort of mitigate a little bit of the glycemic effect of that. So, my favorite thing is just to go to Trader Joe's and get some of their nut, combinations, and that's what I'll snack on during the day for that. So a handful of that. Lunchtime, right at noon, a big salad with some sort of protein on it. That could be, chicken, or it could be salmon or whatever. Want to address the whole vegetarian thing because I know there's a lot of people who are vegetarian. And you just have to find some way of getting adequate amounts of protein and hoping to avoid a lot of those processed and refined carbs. My experience with a lot of vegetarians are that they substitute animal proteins with pasta. And I have a lot of patients that are vegetarian that are really actually very unhealthy. And so it's hard to be a vegetarian if you don't actually like vegetables. And so properly combining foods like beans and rice together will give you a complete protein. But again, that rice can be a bit of an issue if you have a glycemic, handling sugar problem. And so ultimately, lots of times we resort to using some sort of protein supplement to make sure that we're getting adequate amounts of protein there. Okay, so now it's the middle of the afternoon, time for a snack again, and that could be a piece of fruit, it can be some veggies, it can be anything like that. Dinner, again, protein and veggies, and in the evening, if you need something else as a snack, if you're hungry, to have some sort of protein bar or yogurt. Now, the truth is that I wake up in the morning and I don't have enough time to make that omelet. So I could have a protein shake. I could have a low calorie, low sugar Greek yogurt is good, or I'll have a protein bar. There's lots of ways to supplement with that. Got a question here. Sarah wants to know if eating fruit alone would give a high glycemic response. Why not add protein to this meal? Absolutely, you can do that. If you're eating the whole fruit, it will have a bit of a glycemic effect, but not the same thing as having a candy bar or even having a piece of bread or a half of an English muffin or a bagel. And so generally, if you're having the whole fruit, that's fine. And having the fruit with some sort of protein makes it even better. You're again mitigating the glycemic effect of that particular food. So yeah, having an apple with some peanut butter on it would be a good way to approach that. So this would be, for many of us, the perfect kind of meal. And there's lots of ways to alter this based on our own schedules and and what fits for us with our lifestyles. Another question here. Peter wants to know my thoughts on eating red meat. Is pork a red or a white meat? Okay, so my thoughts on eating red meat is if it's a clean meat, meaning it's free range, it doesn't have antibiotics and steroids added to it, that it's actually healthy for us. Now, the way that meat is prepared plays a role with this, and how much fat was in that meat also plays a role with this. And so a lean pork, I don't have as much of a problem with either. Again, it has to do with the quality of it. Now, in Atkins kind of diet, there's people that think that gives them permission to eat a pound of bacon every morning for breakfast, and that's not the case. That's not healthy for you at all. Have to understand that the animals, it's their fat that stores toxins for them, just like our fat stores toxins for us. So whatever fat we're eating from an animal actually contains the toxins that those animals were exposed to. And so it depends on where those animals come from, how they were raised, how they were farmed, and all that sort of stuff. I'm a really big fan of being a locavore. I'm a really big fan of eating foods that come to you from your local environment, of you supporting your local farmers and understanding how they're doing things. And so finding a good farm locally that will supply free-range eggs and then chicken and beef or whatever it is a healthier way to go. All right, hopefully that answers that question for you, Peter. Thank you. Okay, so the next part of this is exercise, and it's, we've talked about the food, and hopefully you guys understand that. The 3 rules, real simple: low glycemic index, eat something within 45 minutes of waking up, eat something every 2.5 to 3 hours during the day. That's the eating part of it. There's another part of this, and that's the exercise. And again, I really encourage us to take a look back in time and see what we used to do. It's all the rage today to try to eat like a caveman, to eat the Paleolithic hunter-gatherer diet. And actually, what I just described to you, low glycemic index and grazing throughout the day, that's actually the way it was. That's what I'm advocating. But there's another big part to that we have to really understand, and that is local caveman did not go to the grocery store to get his food. We have been able to look back in time and see that caloric intake of Paleolithic hunter-gatherers was a lot. I mean, the amount of calories that they took in was actually more than most of us do, even though we may be eating McDonald's and whatever. The difference is that their caloric expenditure was tremendously more than ours. And so if we try to eat like a caveman, but we don't exercise like a caveman, we're going to make we're going to cause a big problem, and we're going to blow up instead of the other way. And so to do this diet, we also are to eat properly. Sorry, we don't want to be on diets. To eat properly and understand our relationship to food and change that, we also have to understand that our caloric expenditure has to increase as well. We have to learn to burn calories on a regular basis. And the purpose of that is to build muscle and to burn calories and all those things that that we know are important. And I can't stress this enough. You really have to take this seriously. The trip to the grocery store is not the same as our ancestors of the past did to have their food, and we have to burn more calories. So oftentimes people will say, okay, well, how about muscle building versus aerobic exercise, and how much of each? And I will tell you that each one is equally important. Again, go back to that first thing I mentioned. Sarcopenia, loss of muscle mass as we age, is the #1 marker of aging. So we have to do things to help build muscle as well. And so general rule of thumb is whatever amount of exercise you have, whatever amount of time you have to dedicate to your exercise, half of it should be on some sort of muscle building activity, and half of it should be on aerobic activity, calorie burning activity. And lots of times you could combine those things. I know that a lot of the group exercise classes are designed to actually do both at the same time, so that you're aerobic and lifting weights at the same time. And that's a great way to sort of condense so that whatever time we have available. But basically, half the time that you have dedicated to each one of those pursuits. I also want to talk a bit about, again, looking back in the past and how we exercised. And again, cavemen didn't exercise for the sake of exercising. They exercised because that's how they preserved life. But their exercise basically was what I just described to you. It was bursts of activity, which are the aerobic part of it, around lifting activities, whether that was moving rocks or building or handling the animals that we just caught. It's a combination of those two things. And there's a kind of exercise that's called Peak 8. It goes by a lot of different names, and this is a really good way of getting your growth hormone levels elevated. And if you do this sort of exercise properly, so I'll just mention it real quickly. If you do this sort of exercise properly, you will increase your growth hormone levels, and that will last for a couple hours after your exercise even. And those growth hormone levels being elevated results in your body using sugar more efficiently and your body finding and targeting fat and using that for energy. And again, that's what we want, fat loss as opposed to weight loss. So the Peak 8 idea basically is bursts of extreme exercise separated by calmer exercise. And you can do this on whatever machine or type of exercise you'd like to do. So if you want to do it on the rower, you can do it. If you want to do it on the stationary bike or the treadmill or the stair step, or if you want to do it with some sort of activity that you like to do, like dancing or running or whatever, it can be done anyway. And basically, it can be done in about 18, 20 minutes. And you're only allowed to do this 3 times a week. If you do it more often than that, you actually start to burn your body out as well. So this is not in substitution of whatever other sort of exercise you want to do. This is in addition to it. And then you can do your regular regimen as well. Or you could make this your only regimen. So again, about 20 minutes 3 times a week. And that is, you warm up for about 3 minutes, and then for 45 seconds, you haul butt. Let's just imagine that we're on the bike, a stationary bike, and that's what we're going to be doing. What I'm talking about hauling butt is that you're going at a moderate pace with very little resistance for about 3 minutes to warm up, and then for 45 seconds, and you want to set a clock and watch it, you crank up the resistance so that it's harder to pedal, and you pedal as fast as you possibly can for 45 seconds. By the end of that 45 seconds, you should be pretty much burnt out, exhausted. Your muscles should be saying, I can't do anymore. You really have to do it to the extreme. And then after 45 seconds, you let up on the resistance and you calm down for about 3 minutes. Just going slowly, just keeping the bike slowly moving, letting your heart rate come back down. And then, boom, you do it again. 45 seconds, hard as you can. And what you'll find is that as you do it, and again, obviously the 8 part of this is you repeat that 8 times. So then when you do that, it's been about 20 minutes total. And you, at the end of that, when you do your number 7 or number 8, it may be that that you're not going much faster than you were when you were resting because of having burnt out everything. You do that, your growth hormone levels are going to go up the equivalent of getting a shot like some of those professional athletes do. And it will last for a couple hours. One thing will stop that from happening. One thing that you could do dietary-wise will cut that off right then and there, and that is to add sugar to your diet. So after you work out like that, you do not want to have a juice or you don't want to have a candy bar, because if you do that, your body will stop with the growth hormone right then and there. So that's sort of the exercise part of this. Stress and its effect on your body. Stress plays a very important role with your body not handling sugar efficiently. So I like to mention this as well. And I did a whole webinar about stress, and we talked about this more in depth. But I'll just go over it again because I think it's important. One of the effects of stress is increased blood sugar. And the reason is because when you're under stress, again, go back to caveman times, saber-toothed tiger jumps in the cave, your body goes into flight or fight mode. One of the effects is increased blood sugar. And the reason is because the body figures you're going to need more energy to be able to do the building and the repair that's going to be needed from that encounter with that saber-toothed tiger. When we were cavemen, saber-toothed tiger eventually left the cave, and then, if we're still alive, we do the building and repair, and then the stress levels go down. For many of our lives, the saber-toothed tiger never leaves the cave, and the result of that is constant tendency towards higher blood sugar. The higher blood sugar in and of itself is not the issue. The issue is the resulting higher levels of insulin, which is one of the masters here in the genesis of all of those chronic diseases that we're trying to avoid, including our waistlines. And so that's one of the negative effects of stress. Another one is fat around the middle especially, and that's because when you're under stress, your body, chronic stress especially, your body actually will try to protect the organs by increasing fat around those organs. And so it's what we call visceral fat, which is the most dangerous. And again, when I was talking about that waist to hip ratio, this is an indicator of that as well. When we're under stress, we have a tendency to put the weight on around our middle. And when we become apple-like, we're much more susceptible for all sorts of diseases, including cardiovascular, etc. There's also an effect on metabolism when we're under chronic stress, because stress controls thyroid function, and so our metabolism goes down, and it makes it harder for us to lose weight. It makes it harder for us to burn calories, which is the opposite of what we want. Here's another one, loss of protein. When you're under chronic stress, your body is constantly trying to use protein for energy. And the tendency is to lose our muscle mass. And again, loss of muscle mass, #1 marker of aging as we get older. And then I also just wanted to mention again the importance of proper sleep. Sleep is critical for growth hormone levels, for fat metabolism, for all that stuff. And there's a really nice article on our website. If you go to wellbeinggps.com and click on the Learning Center, go to the articles, you'll find one that talks about sleep and how it's important and what happens metabolically. But real quickly, I'll just mention, because to me it's tremendously interesting, and that is that when we have the longest hours of daylight, which for many of us is in the August area, metabolically we are driven to do two things: crave carbohydrates and store fat. Crave carbohydrates and store fat. And the reason is because what comes after those longest days of sunlight? That's the harbinger of winter. And so again, biochemically, we're designed to try to get a little bit of extra stored energy and a little bit extra insulation for those cold times, basically hibernating during the winter. And so when we artificially extend the day with our light bulbs and our electricity, we're constantly giving the message to our body that it's August. And our body always wants to crave carbohydrates and store fats. And if you look historically at the availability of affordable electricity that came with the invention of the light bulb, and you see how that spreads across the country, you will see that the exact same spread at the exact same time of diabetes, obesity, and cancer. Very interesting. And so trying to not just get those 6 to 8 hours of sleep, but getting them at the right time is really important. And even if you get the same amount of sleep, say that you're just geared to get 6 hours of sleep every night and you're fine with that, you getting 6 hours from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. will benefit you much more than getting it from 12 to 6. And so trying to get to bed a little bit earlier and reverse that tendency is a really important concept here. So, okay, so that's the stress. Now, there's a whole bunch of supplements. I like to say that I don't like to try to trick the body. Biochemically, you just can't do it, and you can't do it for long. And so these aren't things that I would say, okay, you do this and you can eat whatever you want. It's not licensed to do that way. But there certainly are some supplements that can be helpful in the whole weight loss issue. So number one is fish oil. Very, very important. 2 reasons. One, it helps cells communicate with each other. So when you have fish oil, when you have those proper fats in your diet, cells talk to each other more efficiently. And that has to do with how your body handles sugar. Your insulin resistance will go down just from having fish oil in your supplement regimen. There's another reason why it's helpful, and that is because when you have proper fats coming in, sometimes that's the key that gives your body permission to not need as much stored energy, not need as much fat. And so when you get healthy fats coming in, the body sometimes says, oh, we don't need as much of the stored energy, we have it coming in. So fish oil, number one. Number two, there's certain nutrients that are known to help enhance metabolism and help insulin do its job, basically. Chromium is one of those nutrients. And so insulin works in a very specific way on the receptor sites on the cells, the cell membranes of many cells in your body. And chromium helps insulin get into the proper configuration to be able to hit that receptor site most efficiently. And chromium is oftentimes deficient in our diet. So I don't want to put out the idea that just taking a ton of chromium is going to make it so that you can sit on the couch and lose fat. I know that has been put out there. It doesn't work that way, but getting at least 200 micrograms of chromium with your multivitamin every day is probably a good idea. There's other nutrients like that, like vanadium, which is also important for that same reason. The B vitamins, very, very important for metabolism and proper utilization of energy within your body. And we don't get enough of them. We get, a lot of people are under the impression that they get B vitamins from their grains. But when they look at their grain foods, whether they're breads, pasta, cereals, you'll see enriched with B vitamins. And so enriched on a package means that nutrient was originally taken out because of the processing, and then they tried to add it back. And whenever they do that, whenever we try to mess with nature like that, it doesn't work properly. We put that back synthetic forms of those things, and it's not the same thing. And so, again, a good multivitamin that has proper dosages of the B vitamins, and sometimes I look for ones that have the active forms of the B vitamins, will be much more effective for you. And then there's this little category here that I put that says getting a biochemical advantage. And so there are some things that we can do nutritionally that can be helpful for certain situations. So there's this supplement that's called white kidney bean extract, also known as phase 2. And what that does is that'll help block some of the absorption of some of the starches in our diet. So, you know, it can help when we're not being perfect with our diet. There's other supplements or nutrients that can slow the absorption of sugar from your meal. Certain fibers that you have before you eat doesn't stop those sugars from getting absorbed, but what it does is it slows that absorption down. And so that turns a high glycemic index meal into a more medium or moderate glycemic index meal. And when that happens, then your body can respond in a more measured approach as well, and you don't overproduce insulin and, you know, that whole vicious cookie cycle thing. And then there are other nutrients. There's one that's called coffeegenic, which is, it's not the caffeine in there, it's another ingredient that that plays a role with postprandial blood sugar, meaning after you eat, helping to moderate that some. And so it's a company called Life Extension that makes a few of these products. We have them on our website with explanations about how they work as well. And that's the way that you can sort of get a biochemical leg up on this issue. So I just wanted to, number one, thank you all for attending. Cheryl, thank you so much for all the hard work that you do. And Becky, thank you as well for the preparation of the PowerPoint presentations. You guys, I could not do this without you, and I really do appreciate it. I want to remind everybody that these webinars are archived on the website, wellbeinggps.com. And so ones that we've done in the past, which are like the flu and vitamin D and stress, and then this one today will be on in about a week. You can go there, and so if you found this information helpful, you need to want to go back to it and or want to share it with somebody, just refer them to the website. And that includes the PowerPoint presentation, everything that you see right now. And this is what's coming up in the future. So in next month, we're going to be talking about cholesterol. This is really an interesting one. I had a conversation with somebody about this yesterday. Cholesterol is that issue that we have such a hard time accepting that medicine is wrong about, because it's just ingrained in us and none of us even question. And I'm telling you that looking at cholesterol as the major, cause of heart disease is a huge mistake, and that's why it doesn't matter how much we keep lowering those standards, heart disease doesn't keeps not changing. And the reason is because it's not really about cholesterol. So we're going to go into that in much more detail, and then you'll see, upcoming ones. And we've got a whole year's worth of a calendar coming up. So again, thank you all very much, and I'm going to hand this back over to Cheryl to wrap it up.
Again, thanks everyone for attending today. I do notice there were a couple of unanswered questions, and I'm sorry that we did not get to them. However, if you would like to go to the wellbeinggps.com website and select the Contact Us button and contact Brian directly, he would be happy to answer those questions. Again, I apologize we didn't get to those last two questions. Again, we appreciate you coming and listening to our webinar. Look forward to you coming in the future and participating. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us at www.wellbeinggps.com. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.